Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee. Today is the 18th of January. It's the Audit Committee of Norwich City Council. We will take the first item on the agenda, which is apologies. Have we had any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Peake.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is public questions and petitions. Have we had any?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Any members on the committee have any declarations? See no indication. Thank you. Item 4, minutes, accuracy of the minutes. Members have had these circulated in advance of the meeting. Any comments from members on the minutes? No, I guess just a small one from me. On the item 6, it says the 12th and 18th of November 2002. So I assume that is 2021. But apart from that small error, we agree the minutes. Yep, committee has agreed the minutes. Thank you. So, item 5 on the agenda is the internal audit Q2 update. So, if I hand over to Faye to introduce the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You may remember at our last meeting we went through the plan completed to date and observed that we had a few delays in terms of delivering our coverage. So at that meeting I took a note to take away the plan, have a look over it, have a look at the risks facing the council and come up with a revised version with a clear justification for any areas that we would then defer into the following year. So this report outlines the plans for that approach. The report just starts off by outlining the situation and also describing that the internal audit plan, when endorsed, should be subject to regular review to make sure that it's still fit for purpose. So we're carrying out that activity as part of this report. So in summary, we have a total of 65 days that I believe we can defer and reconsider for planning for 2022-23. And you'll see in the table on page 15 of your agenda pack those areas that I believe we should defer and reasons for that. So I'm happy to take any questions on those after I've presented the report. Moving on to 2.3, the consultancy days. The way that the reporting template that I've started to provide is structured, you can see that a large proportion of the plan isn't delivered. And a large number of those days actually do in fact relate to consultancy work, which may or may not be delivered depending on the needs of the council. So what I'm proposing here is that actually the reporting now focuses on the audit areas that we will carry out and the audits that we will use to pull together the annual opinion. The consultancy days, if we do a number of those and the findings coming out of that are significant, then a separate piece of work and information will be provided to the committee to outline the work that we've done. So, for example, you'll see in the joint ventures insourcing 45 days, we have already agreed that myself will support Project Place and will attend meetings. So a report on my work and the assurances provided will be given to the committee as part of that. Moving on to the page 16, we talk about additional resource. So there's 3 audits there that I would like to use an outsourced resource for in order to ensure that we deliver the plan of work that we need to in time for year end. A summary of the original plan days and then the revised plan days is provided on page 17. And then as part of the appendices, you've got the original plan as endorsed by you last year now, and then the revised version at Appendix 2. So we can do an easy comparison between what we originally had and what I'm proposing today. So over to you if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye, for introducing the report. I look around at members and Vice Chair Councillor Driver has indicated. Thank you.
Yeah, can you just explain to me about how we actually save money by actually going out to external resources? If we're saving the days on the audit, well, it seems like the work we're saving on, we're putting out to other people. So can you tell me how much that would cost? What's the difference between cost between having it in here and resourcing it out to another company?
Thank you. Yes, so the focus of revising the plan hasn't been on cost. It has been what work do we need to deliver for year end to get the plan done so that we can provide an opinion. So yes, we have reduced the days. We will need to top up our resources to deliver the remainder of the work, but that hasn't been a key consideration in pulling this report together. It's about providing an annual opinion on the control, risk management and governance frameworks for the council. And as revised, that is sufficient to allow us to do that.
So we're actually done the report, cutting days out, and we don't know how much this is going to cost us? This could cost us a fortune. A lot more than what it would have done if we had the internal auditors. I mean, that seemed to me there's no work done on it at all. There's no plan done on it at all. I mean, well, let's cut another 10 days out, might as well. I mean, we ain't done no plans about it. That just seemed to me, well, what's going on? I don't know. Anyone can tell me about that?
Hannah Simpson at this point. Thank you for raising those points.
Yeah, so when we set the budget for this year, obviously we didn't have the slightly revised arrangement in place that we do now with FAE. So what we can do is, through this arrangement, we can draw on some of the additional resource, the benefits of being in the arrangement with South Norfolk, to be able to draw in some additional resource to help us to deliver the plan. That will cost us, I think we say in the report, an extra £20,000, but it is still within that original envelope that we set to deliver the internal audit plan. So it's not an increase in costs, but we're actually taking the benefit of being able to draw on some additional resource through the arrangement we have.
Does that answer your points, Councillor Driver?
Well, I've got a figure, £20,000, but I'm not sure if that's the amount, what it's going to cost or not. I know it's really come out with one yet.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Chair, can I just sort of remind the committee that we didn't actually outsource the service this year because of that transition year with the contract. We weren't actually able to do that. So currently we employ our auditors, of which FAE is overseeing and supervising the work that they do. So actually any day's change is actually around our internal resources and how we've used that internal resource. But that internal resource has been utilised to do some other work in relation to risk and embedding risk throughout the organisation. So those two individuals that we have been fully employed, but obviously we have a fixed cost in relation to those staff costs, so there is no staff saving.
Does that answer your points, Councillor?
Well, yeah.
Okay, I've seen that Councillor Haynes has indicated.
Hi, yeah, obviously, you know, this is all about risk-based approach, isn't it, to audit, and I think I've got some concerns about the process, I guess, by which we came to the conclusion that we could defer some of these ones that are on page 15, because they've sort of been presented to us as these are the ones we're deferring, and there's nothing about the process that which we use to come to why are these ones the ones we think can be deferred, what's the risk to deferring these ones. There's reasons for deferral, but there's nothing about any risks that we incur by perhaps deferring these. There's no alternatives been presented, and I obviously get that some of it's about the numbers and how you can make the numbers add up as well. So there's an argument that presenting too many alternatives to the committee can cause issues. But yeah, I guess I want to know what the process was, what alternatives were considered, and how we came to the conclusion that these were the least risky ones, and what are the risks of having picked these 5 to defer.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, so if you look at the areas outlined on page 15, there is a reason that kind of goes into why those areas might be smarter to move into the following year. And as part of this approach, we sat down and considered how many days we had left remaining up until the 31st of March, and how many days the two individuals that we have within the internal team were able to deliver in that time, based on what we've completed so far. So that was the first consideration. We then look at the significant risks being raised on the register for the council and the council's objectives as well, to see whether those areas are scoring as a high risk. Nothing has been identified in any of those areas. I think distinctly we also need to remember that when the plan was endorsed by the Audit Committee last year, there wasn't a justification or a reason entered into that report for any of those areas. So I think what we need to do going forward is actually really clearly outline why an area has been added in the plan in the first place, what risk that relates to, and then give you some comfort that the coverage is provided based on that. And you will then clearly be able to identify whether you feel we've missed anything and suggest additions for senior management approval. So I think that reason for deferral section in that table does go away to explain why we don't necessarily need to carry out that work right at this time, and there are more important areas in the plan that do need to be delivered, and we've therefore prioritised those.
Thank you, Faye. Just looking around for members. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. This is I suppose, tangentially related to an item or a reference to something in this item, and I'd like to see your guidance, actually, if I could. We have in here provision for IT audit, and in the December issue of the LGA First magazine, there was a whole section on understanding the cyber risk for your council, with a sort of some sort of good starting point questions that should be asked. And I wonder if I can get your guidance as to whether that could be something that could be brought to this committee. So there's a particular thing on cyber risk for the council. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I see it only as prudent and sensible to bring that to this committee. I think that the officers and the council are working tremendously hard on improving cybersecurity within the organisation, and it needs to be dynamic on such issues. We can face threats from anywhere, and I do think we are going through a process, but I think that it would be a fine exercise and starting point for the committee to do. I do know that we will have quite a full agenda at the next meeting, and we will need to call an extraordinary meeting in order to finalise the statement of accounts. But I would be happy to take a steer from the committee on your suggestion that, and if I could phrase it, that we bring that forward to the next available committee where there is time on the agenda to give it its best practice. So I will look towards officers to see if that seems to be okay for us to consider that as a start point. And if that is the case, then I'll put it across to members for their vote.
So within our current arrangements, we work with TIA, and they have a very specialist team around cyber work as an audit team, and they have said to us they'd be very willing to help us to look at that. I just need to make you aware, obviously, at April we're hoping to do a mobilisation of a new contract, of which our audit team will be moving into that new contract. So I will ask TIA if they'd be able to do something for our March agenda, obviously giving consideration to how busy it is at the moment. But ideally, if you wouldn't mind, if we could ask them to bring something back for June, I don't think that would be unreasonable.
Absolutely. I think the June suggestion is good. I just want to pick up on Councillor Wright's point a little further. Do you feel that the information, unfortunately I haven't read the article myself, haven't had the opportunity, but do you feel that apart from the external support from TIR, what they would bring to the June-July meeting, do you feel that it is worth us considering elements of that independently as a committee to look at, to help shape our thoughts as well? What's your view?
Thank you. It occurred to me that it's something that I think, my thought process was there are a series of questions I'd like to ask, and what is the best committee to do it? It feels to me like the audit committee is the best place for it to be. I don't particularly envisage it being necessarily a very long item, but I think it is important that we understand some of the cyber risk and have a place to ask those questions.
So taking from your point there, could I perhaps suggest that you potentially circulate the article to members in advance? I think that there's a potential there, identifying potential training need, perhaps for this committee to better understand cyber risk moving forward over perhaps the next cycle, and then also welcoming a report from officers at the summer meeting. I'll just let Annabelle back in on that one.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Chair, I think we might be clarifying that we don't necessarily need a report for the first discussion. It's more a discussion around an interactive briefing on what the risks are, and then maybe we can look at that as to how it goes forward, as to what that means for us as a council. Is that the proposal? Because that might be possible to do that earlier in the cycle for you.
I think that would be a prudent way forward. Do you think that would be good? I can see Councillor Wright nodding. I'm just looking around for committee members. I'll be happy with that. Excellent. So we'll proceed in that way. Thank you very much. Thank you for raising the point. On the report that we've received, turning back to it, are there any other points or views made? Councillor Hayes.
Yeah, back to those 65 days that we're bringing forward to next year, on page 15. I guess I have a concern as well that this is obviously quite a significant amount of work we're bringing forward into the next audit year. But if you look at our original plan, it was 300 days for this year. If we're looking, there'd be 300 audit days already for 2022-23. That puts us up to 365 days of audit work needed, which is a lot, isn't it? It's a significant increase on what would normally be in an audit cycle. I may be wrong about that being a normal number. I'm fairly new to the committee. So I guess I wanted to get some assurance that we definitely think we can carry out that extra work on top of the normal 2022-23 cycle on the resource we're going to have, and that we've adequately planned for that increase now next year, making sure we don't find ourselves in this position again this time next year, I guess.
Thank you, and that's a really good point that you make there. And I just want to kind of move us from this rolling programme idea where we have a list of auditable areas that we have to do once every 3 years, and that the days allocated are, stuck. What we need to be doing is looking at every area we propose to audit and justifying why it needs to be done and what the risks are that are involved. So as part of the planning process, which has started, and we're going to meet with all heads of service to discuss their areas, we will ask the question, what are you working on? What are your key risks in those areas? We're also building up an idea of the previous audit gradings in each of those areas too, so that we can have a better idea about where the coverage is really needed and we can make best use of those days. So in these 65 days, if we do come to have the discussion and it's actually ascertained that that could be done in a later year, then we'll put it into the 3-year strategic plan. But this needs to be up for discussion regularly to make sure that what we're looking at is what's needed and is going to provide the most assurance to you as a committee.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? So if you're sort of talking about a 3-year programme and prioritising what needs to be provided at any given point, would that mean that if there was an area that was always deemed to be really low risk, always never made it to the top of the priority list, would 3 years be the longest it would be allowed to go without an audit? I guess my concern there is, could we get into a situation where something was seen as low risk, was left 5 years, 7 years, and then it was deemed there'd been a long-term problem? What kind of risk are we leaving ourselves open to as a council? But if it's 3 years, is that the maximum?
I'm not proposing that we audit every area in the council every 3 years, no. And there may be some areas that are low risk that go for longer than that. If, however, we're working on our risk management framework and that is being championed and improvements are being made in that area, what we will be able to see is those risks bubbling up from an operational level to being more of an impact. At that point, we would then ascertain that it needs to be added into the plan. The risk management framework and the council should be able to manage itself. Management should be trusted to be allowed to manage those lower level risks that don't have a direct impact on the strategic objectives and aims of the council, in my view. So we need to focus our resources on the most important areas, but keep an eye on it and keep revising it and watch those risks that are bubbling up from an operational level.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I think that's a fair point that Councillor Haynes raises. It's duly noted that some areas simply may not be looked at, but we'll be concentrating on operational issues. I would take exception in the respect that even though some things may not have a great impact on the council, it can have a reputational impact, and so although that is the choice that the organisation has gone in, I don't subscribe to it, and I do think that everything should at some period come back, even if it's longer than 3 years, but there should be some process personally. But Faye, do you want to come back in that?
If it is a significant reputational risk, then it's going to score highly, isn't it, on the risk register? So it would then therefore be provided in the plan and would provide coverage for that. But that's not to say that if there are concerns over a certain area, that we have a discussion as part of planning, that we actually say these are the reasons why actually we think, Faye, you need to add this element in, you've forgotten about this, and this is the reasons why. We can then have a really good conversation with senior management about whether that additional coverage needs to be added in. So yeah, there's definitely, I think the point that I'm trying to get across is that this plan needs to be fluid. It can't be, well, we've got an allocation of this many days, we didn't audit accounts payable last year, so therefore we need to do it next year. We need to be flexible and meet the needs of the council and be much more focused on risk, I would say.
Councillor Stooley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Just to develop this a little bit further, you've talked in general terms. Can you give an example of an area that may have an allocation of days of audit that are too high at the moment?
I don't think I can give an example in this plan where we've got too many days on a certain area. I haven't come across that in this plan. What I will say is that with the more traditional rolling plan approach, you can have coverage added in there on kind of lower key areas such as allotments or play areas, when actually our coverage and our resources are better spent on, you know, higher value risks and areas that represent a significant risk to the council, like housing compliance and planning and those areas. So I think it's not necessarily about the number of days that we're delivering, it's about the quality of the audits and making sure that we're getting them the coverage in the right areas.
Okay, thank you. So those examples are areas of low risk that we may consider leaving for longer, essentially, between audit.
Longer, definitely, and if a risk does come up that you know, it's very obvious that we need to have a look at that, or we speak to the service areas during planning and we sit down and have a conversation with them and they say, we could really do, we're changing the policy, we've had some issues, we've got some resourcing problems, can you come in and help us and provide some assurance? Because let's not forget that the assurance we provide isn't just for you guys as an audit committee, it's also for management as well. So if they request that, then again, we take that back to senior management. We also bring back any revisions to the plan in our progress report, so you can see the changes and you can see what's coming in and out as we go throughout the year in the new template.
Thank you for that. Are there any other observations on this report from the committee? Okay, we're coming up to nearly 30 minutes on this item. I will spend a brief minute speaking about it. I appreciate the report. I appreciate the pressures that the council is facing in terms of internal audit delivery. You know, it's a difficult area for recruitment at the moment. It is an area that is understaffed, and we have had a pandemic, etc., which has had knock-on effects in delivering the previous cycle and, of course, in this cycle. It's disappointing that we lost a whole quarter. I do think it affects the quality of the audit, although maybe not the assurance given by the internal audit officer. I would hope that by joining the consortium next year, which I believe we'll be discussing at council next week, will help alleviate that concern in the long term, and that we won't have those issues moving forward. I believe at our next meeting we'll be considering a draft of the internal audit plan for next year. So I would also encourage members to think over the next week or two, and if there are areas that you have a particular interest in that you would like to be considered for the internal audit plan, I think now is a good time for us to start that dialogue with the internal audit officer and CLT so that we can help to inform that decision-making process. When I first joined the audit committee a few years ago, we were delivering around 450 days. I believe that, in fact, other councils may even deliver more. But we have changed our approach. It is a risk-based approach. It now includes a lot of consultancy work to build the strength and robustness of the council's mechanisms and processes moving on. So it's a different style of approach. I would still like to make sure that certain areas are looked at more often. I would still like to see as many days delivered as possible in good old-fashioned audit, but I do appreciate the advantages of consultancy days as well. I hope that through the process that we've gone through this year with a forced reduction doesn't result in an audit plan that is presented with significantly reduced days next year because we had a reduced amount delivered this year. But I think that those would be my final comments on the item. So is the committee happy to accept the recommendations, effectively endorsing the revised plan? Yep, that's agreed. So we will close that item. Thank you, Faye, for presenting that. We will now move on to the item 6, which is the Audit Committee self-assessment, which I do feel has been a good and positive piece of work we've started to undertake. So I'll hand over to Faye to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you again, Chair. So this self-assessment is the first undertaken by the Audit Committee at Norwich City Council, and I provide the results in the report. We've carried out the questionnaire in the first half of the assessment, and that was done at an offline session with members a while ago now, in November. We've actually, as a result of that exercise, come up with a few actions, some timeframes associated with those. So it's just an opportunity today to go through that, make any revisions and changes that you may want to, agree the deadlines and timeframes that we've allocated to those action points, and also agree to carry out the rest of the assessment next year and revise it again so we keep on top of it and see what our progress looks like. So over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Chair. I just will start by saying that I think that was a really positive piece of work that we did as a committee to get a better understanding of our abilities and levels and whether or not we are compliant. And I appreciated all the input from the members of the committee in that process. Does any members of the committee have any comments on the general process we've so far undertaken? And then we can also move specifically into the date profiles that have been put forward. I've seen Councillor Driver indicate, followed by Councillor Haynes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. When I was reading this, and I thought we had a good meeting in November and asked the questions quite well, and I thought we went quite well. But when I read this report, every single question, number 8, number 9, ... we only partly done something. Now, I know I'm not quite at English, and what partly you may mean in a dictionary and what partly I may mean in a dictionary might be totally different. But can we have a different word or something? Something like we didn't bother about it, we just half off, just done a half on it, and we'll just make the rest up later on, kind of question and answer.
Thank you. It's a fair point. It's just the questionnaire that's provided by SIPFA. And I think the term partly means that you don't feel you're fully compliant with that area. There's actually some more work to do. So it's just why that's there in the tick box. So where we have got partly, we've got some actions to do and some timeframes associated with getting it to a yes, basically.
Well, I read all that, I just with partly, we talked about such a good part.
Can I remind members to use the mic, but thank you. If Councillor Driver has finished there, the next indication was from Councillor Haynes. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was really pleased we did this bit of work as well. I thought it was really useful, especially coming in fairly new to the Audit Committee. I did a stint at some point some years back, but it was really useful to sort of get an idea of where the committee was at, and I think thanks to the Chair, because I think he was pushing to do this for a while, and thanks to the officers as well who were keen to push this forward. I think it's been really useful. I have got some questions on sort of the way the dates have been put round though, I think, because I think question 18, partly, we wanted to get some feedback from staff and the other people interacting with the committee about how we work. And I think it'd be really useful if that was used to feed into the training programme. But when you look at the dates, that's one of the later things we're going to do. And I mean, I'm aware that there's a whole rolling thing with, you know, we won't necessarily know what training the audit committee needs until it's had some training in some ways. There's limited point training people now when we could be changing around in the new civic year anyway. But I think it would be useful to at least be able to use some of that information that we gain in under question 18 to inform the training, to inform the next lot of self-assessment we do, that sort of thing. So to get some clarity on how those dates were worked out and whether we can use bits to feed into other bits where it's necessary.
Yeah, so it's absolutely down to you where you want the proposed target dates to sit. What I could suggest perhaps is, as part of the year-end processes, when we put our year-end report together, we do issue a questionnaire to the chair of the audit committee, but also to senior management, to ask them about feedback from the internal audit service. From that perspective, at that point, we could pull something together that is issued back out to officers to ask them, and then include that as a separate piece of information to circulate. But then that could then help to inform the training programme. But it would be an earlier target date of around June rather than August. Does that work?
That would suit me if you guys think it's viable to put it together by that, because obviously we've got the training, more in-depth training scheduled for July, haven't we? And like I said, I think it would be good to get it in before that, and then it can, feed into the appointment of the independent member as well, because then, if we've identified some of our weaknesses, but if senior management have got other things they want to feed in, then that might feed in who we choose to appoint as an independent member as well. So I think, getting that bit in first would be quite useful to me, at least. I don't know what the rest of the committee think.
Thank you for that observation. I would conclude that sounds relatively a logical way forward, and I also think that Faye's suggestion of sending around a questionnaire can help sort of square that off. Does the rest of the committee subscribe that revised date? One nods. Yep. Okay. So if we'll proceed with that kind of revision there, Faye, if that's okay. Are there any other points about this item, or anything about the specific timings that put down? I do want to thank officers for putting the times down. I think to have an oversight of when we're scheduling to do it helps us understand when we'll be doing some of this work and how that fits in with our process. But are there any other comments on the suggested dates that have been provided? Leah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight, in respect of the question 9, action around Treasury management, I think it might just be helpful to say we did raise this point provisionally with the Constitution Working Party at their meeting in November, because we were aware that this was something you were interested in. The Working Party were interested to understand more thoughts from the Audit Committee on what they would see that role being, and perhaps ensuring that's articulated. So if you are minded that Treasury management is something you'd like to be involved in, they'd like to see some potential proposals or ideas around that from the committee come forward. It might be something we're able to bring to one of your later meetings for consideration.
Thanks for raising that point. I think that's a sensible suggestion from the Constitution Working Party. It perhaps would have been helpful to receive that via email a few weeks ago or so for us to consider it rather than off the cuff now in the meeting. What I would suggest to the committee is that we start to construct a dialogue of consensus around that. So if myself, Faye and Leah potentially start an email chain with other members of the committee, so we can maybe structure a few thoughts about Treasury management, get a consensus from the committee, and then submit that to the Constitution Working Party for their consideration. Does that sound a good way of tackling it, rather than trying to debate it out now on a agenda item which is not applicable to that particular piece of work? Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we'll agree to do that. So we will. I think that's a great idea, Leah. We will do that, and if we can do that via email, we'll do that over the coming weeks. Councillor Driver.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I just ask you or one of our members, employees, have we got enough time to do all this? I mean, we have other things go into audit every month or every 2 months when we meet. And it seemed like, sometimes the meetings go on for quite a long while. And it seemed like some of these, there's 2 lots in each month or some of the months. Now, have we got time to actually give this the time that just should be deserved? Or are we actually going to have other meetings with a regular audit, what we go through every month? I mean, have we got time to do all this? I mean, to just push, and it all sounds great what we're doing, and fantastic. This is the way forward, and it all sounds really good. But I'm just worried about time for committee members and what the implications are for that.
Well, thank you for raising it, Councillor Driver. I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's in many ways it's a similar point that the Labour, Liberal Democrats, and Greens were raising at county when the Conservatives effectively shut down meetings after 2.5, 3 hours and no motions were debated. I think that we receive an allowance to represent the people, and my personal opinion is a meeting should go on as long as it is required to go on. But the point you raise is obviously we don't want to overload certain meetings, we don't want fatigue, and so we do need to structure accordingly. Many of the points that are raised here are not really action points for committee meetings per se, but the additional work that we're doing, with the assessment and the ongoing annual assessment, I think we can schedule an offline meeting annually to do that. I don't think the committee would have an issue because of the benefits and the added value it gives the organisation. If we were to be incorporating Treasury management into our working sphere, I can't see that consuming lots of extra meetings, but would just become indicative of a normal meeting. And I will also be striving to keep our agenda time sensitive with the cooperation of the committee so that we are not under undue burden. But I do reiterate, we are working on behalf of the people, and I am fully prepared to put in that work for those people. But I think your concern is noted. Is there any other views from the committee on the point that Councillor Driver raises? Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if it's worth sort of making provision for a couple of extraordinary meetings in the calendar throughout the year, not on any specific dates, and if they're not needed, they won't be used, but if people understand that, we have provision for an extra meeting or two in advance, then when it comes up, it's no surprise.
I think that's a really good point you raise. I'd like to turn back in the direction of officers. Obviously, the final agenda item tonight is to discuss an extraordinary meeting due to the delay of the sign-off of the statement of accounts by external audit. So we do have ad hoc meetings where, occasionally in our cycle. I think with additional training, identifying issues, in terms of the self-assessment, etc. I think we could schedule those in as offline meetings, but very early in the calendar. But to turn to your point about extraordinary meetings, public meetings, whether or not we should bank a couple at the start of the next cycle, I will really refer to officers to respond for that. Yeah, informal. Yeah, when I say offline, I mean informal in that previous statement. But Leah, to answer on the extraordinary meetings, or Annabelle?
I'm conscious the director also suggested, but my experience of scheduling extraordinary meetings, as he's suggesting, is that you can almost guarantee that whatever business you'd need to transact, it needs to be done the week before you've scheduled an extraordinary one. I think there are potentially other ways we can look at if we need to have extraordinary meetings. How can we do it in a way that ensures that the most amount of people need to be present? For example, there's technology survey tools you can use to quickly find out who's available on certain dates. And I'd rather approach it that way than potentially having dates available that we might in all event need to cancel, and then we're justifying why we need to cancel a meeting that we scheduled in just in case. It can become a bone of unnecessary contention.
Thank you. And Annabelle, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think what it would be good to do is to agree the role and undertaking of the Audit Committee and then draft that work plan accordingly to ensure that we don't have too many meetings that are longer than aimed for, really, because there is an attention span for all of us when we get protracted meetings, but have enough meetings to be able to cover the business. So I have committed to doing a review of how other people are looking at Treasury management and happy to advise and share that information with you all, because it was a good question that came up through the self-assessment, and I want to make sure we've given it due consideration, and that if it's not audit, where is it happening if it needs to be reviewed. So if you don't mind, Chair, I'd still like to be part of that review and commit to looking at that for April time, that we can have some feedback. But obviously, now understanding the Constitution Working Party's asked for sort of some more feedback from the Audit Committee. I'm happy to do the research, though, and share that with you as a committee and help sort of facilitate that request back to the Constitution Working Party. If you'd be happy, I assist with that.
Yes, no, thank you for that specific point about Treasury management. I can see that there's a general consensus to appreciate that support, and so we can do it in a timely manner with the Constitution Working Party. And I just want to pick up on Leah's point. I think I agree with the point that Leah raises about scheduling extra meetings and then them not coming off. What I would say is that audit is a key function. It's one of the four pillars of statutory committees that we have to operate and facilitate. Councillor Driver, as chair of planning, will no doubt testify that the every month meeting, which can go on for half a day or so, we get off relatively lightly with our 4 or 5 meetings a year for around 2 hours. So I think at the moment, I don't think the burden of audit committee meetings is strenuous on us. I take the point from Annabelle that we don't want meetings overrunning, and fatigue setting in. But let's kind of look at the functions of the committee. Let's see how many meetings we need to schedule for the next cycle, whether that be 4, 5 or 6. And I'm sure that all members, in the interest of the council, will be more than happy to fulfil those duties. In reference to the Treasury management, I'm very pleased that the self-assessment has identified that as an area. It is an area that I think audit should be looking at. I have said that in the past. I would be happy to accept legitimate reasons of where another area of the council to be reviewing that if that comes out of the work that we see. But in my mind, that sits with audit at the current time and until shown to be different. So I hope that we can do that and welcome that into our work programme. Just before we bring the item to a close, are there any other comments about the self-assessment work we've done, the findings that it has, or the dates set by members? No. So just to summarise briefly, I'm first of all very appreciative of Faye for helping us do the self-assessment. I think it's something that we have needed to do. I think it now, having it annually on our programme, having it regularised, helps us have that checks and balance and helps us perform better, improve and give value back to the council. So I think all of that's important. I very much appreciate all the contributions that members made in that process. And although there are answers here that are partly answered, it does show that actually we are generally performing well as a committee, and we are now clearly starting to identify areas where we can be better, and that can only be to the benefit of this council and this city. So I appreciate the work that we've done there, and I think when we get through to the second stage of this, and then we're doing this annually, this becomes a regularised thing. You know, we will reap the benefits the years moving forward. I would like to say that I'm perfectly happy with the dates that are set out. I appreciate Councillor Haynes' change that she's put forward. I would just like to say that what we identified in question 4, training to be considered for members to raise awareness of the role of the audit committee. I think that's very important. I'm pleased we've identified that, and that's clearly something that I have been asking for and highlighting for a while. Question 9, the committee requests that CLT and the Constitution Working Party considers whether the Treasury Management Framework should be reviewed by the Audit Committee, but we know that's underway now, and so that gives me a great assurance to see that we are finally addressing that. Question 12, the committee considers that independence could be strengthened by appointing an independent member. I'm very pleased that we've got that. I think that will really help the committee. I look forward to welcoming an independent member. Again, it's something that I've been calling for a couple of years. I think we will get a lot of value out of that. That's currently scheduled for July 22. In an ideal world, I think I would love to have that person on board now. I think at the start of the next cycle would be absolutely brilliant, but it's about getting the right person in place. It's about getting that right support for the committee. So I look forward to welcoming that person to the committee to add that value and support for our work moving forward. So I just want to say well done to the committee for the work that they've undertaken here, and thanks to officers for this. And so I put it to the committee that we approve the recommendations in the report. And Councillor Driver.
No.
Oh, yeah. So, so effectively it was to discuss the checklist and the report, ensure accurate reflection of the discussion and actions required, and update as appropriate. Well, we've made an update and we feel it's a fair reflection. So thank you for your work on that committee, and we'll close that item. And we will now look at the final item on the agenda, which is item 7, which is extraordinary meeting. So I'll let officers introduce why we are in the need for an extraordinary meeting, and then we'll discuss briefly. But I would like to caveat that, and I'm sure officers will go into detail, is that there are still a set of unknown variables about the sign-off of the statement of accounts, which means it's very hard for us today to set a meeting date for the statement of accounts. So I would like to propose, and I'll let officers in a second, but I would like to propose that the decision for an extraordinary meeting is delegated to the chair and vice chair to set in accordance with officers once the variables come back from the external audit, effectively when we know we can set a meeting. I don't think there's much point setting a meeting now when we don't know when we get the final sign-off. So that's what I will be proposing, but just let officers just explain any further on that if needs be.
Thank you, Chair. So as part of any external audit process, we have a plan of which the auditors work to, and there are regular meetings with our team internally on progress. Last week, I attended a meeting with Hannah where the auditors were very honest with us. They've had some challenges with resources and availability of staff to be able to progress the audit the way they'd hoped to. It does mean that they haven't done the extent of the testing that they should have completed by now, and they are actually going to be using some of their central teams to support that. What we're currently waiting on, though, is a timeline. They've had a resourcing meeting of looking at where they can pull resources from elsewhere. They're also having to look to an internal team within EY to try and support them on some specialist audit that they want to do in relation to properties specifically. And the current timeline we've been told is potentially another month before that team will be able to report back. So this is just challenging us on the timelines. We should have been sat here tonight talking about the audit outcomes, and unfortunately we're just not in that position. It gives us a big challenge. We're kind of running 3 years at the moment, but I think we've briefed you on our concerns about the time of the audit previously. To now be moving it right over when we're doing budgets as well is a big challenge for the team. So we do appreciate your patience on this. I'm sorry that we can't give you another proposed date, but we are in the hands of our external auditors. The team are still working tirelessly to try and respond to all the questions and turn them around in a timely manner, but obviously there are some times where I'm having to be aware that we are doing budget papers at the same time. So yeah, that's the update, Chair.
Thank you. Any points, views? Councillor Driver.
Is there any penalties because we're going to be late?
There's no penalties to us. Unfortunately, there aren't any penalties to EY either. They believe their contract with which they're working under doesn't actually require them to have concluded the audit within the actual statutory guidance that we have of when audits should be completed, which is how we ended up with the audit starting well outside of our normal processes. And unfortunately, EY will continue until they feel that they've done their appropriate work to be able to give their opinion, and until they get to that point, unfortunately, they won't provide that opinion. So.
Can I just come back? Surely some government department has told us we've got to have this in by such a date, and we're going to be a lot later than this date. Surely this government place ain't going to say, oh, sorry, you're a bit late, we'll wait, and we'll wait, and we'll wait, and we'll wait. Surely they must be getting on someone's back to say, where's your audit and why haven't you done it?
Yeah,
and if you ain't done it by next Monday, we'll come in and take over.
Unfortunately, there's just nobody to take over. The audit teams are just struggling for resources. As we explained at the last committee, the challenge we've got in audit, whether that's internal or external, that area of expertise is just completely challenged for resources. Unfortunately, we just are in the hands of EY. The contractors have been let to EY, and they will deliver in accordance with their resource availability. Unfortunately, there's just nothing we can do other than try and encourage our auditors to work with us. We have already asked the question at when they will come in and audit next year's, because as you're aware, we met our statutory deadlines, and it's very disappointing for us to be caught now at the very end of the tail end of the year. That's partly why they were asking for the extraordinary meeting or moving of dates potentially on the work plan for your audit committee, because of the fact that we want to conclude this prior to producing the current year's accounts, because literally we are weeks away and already normally working on year end, but we need to service the audit at the moment before we then turn our priority to actually doing this year end accounts. It's just a challenging time, Councillor Driver.
Councillor Haynes.
Yeah, I suppose linked to that, I just wanted to ask what the impact is on this year's year-end accounts and what the impact is on the budget setting process as well, in terms of if it's going to cause any issues, delays with any of that.
We will continue with the budget process as we are, and we're on track for delivering all of the budget that we need to. What we won't be able to do is to deal with anything we don't know. And the reality is, if there is an audit adjustment that could have an impact on our revenue position, I will just report that through to you at the time at which I know it's been substantiated and basically been agreed as an audit adjustment. As we're aware, we haven't got anything that actually impacts on the revenue position from a charge on council tax. There are some adjustments, minor adjustments, that we'll be doing in relation to the balance sheet and movement between that. But it's not an impact on the council tax. So nothing at the moment that I'm aware of is going to affect the budget position, but I do have to, and I will be making that statement in the budget papers, that obviously we haven't concluded that year's audit, but we've done as much as we can with the information we know.
Thank you. Has that answered your points, Councillor Haynes? Councillor Stooley.
Thank you. Yeah, just a comment, my regular comment. This is a company who are telling us they don't have the resources. Their annual turnover is £40 billion, and they have 312,250 employees as of 2021.
Thank you for that fact. What I would say is even ourselves as an organisation have struggled with recruitment in internal audit. So there definitely does seem to be a shortage of resource in that industry. What I would say is that it's highly disappointing that we're sat here today and not being able to close off last year, that it puts undue pressure on our officers who should be commended, and I'm sure the committee share that with me, commended for closing the accounts on schedule last year and the work that they do supporting the council through budget setting work and supporting the committee here. I think we're in the situation that we are. I fear that even with the renegotiation of external auditors, which we discussed at our last meeting, and the potential for increased costs to this council, which I do believe will be more reflective on the work that is produced, and that those previous contracts were undervalued when tendered for. My personal view is that we will not see an improvement in the efficiencies of external audit because of that new contract, because of the resources issues in that industry. So we may well be paying more next time and still be in this situation. So it's not ideal. So I thank officers for this. Jackie has told me that we cannot delegate to the chair and vice chair, but we can consult with the chair and vice chair. So if there aren't any...
You delegate to...
Okay, well, we'll I think Councillor Drive wants to come in, but my suggestion is that we delegate to Annabelle to consult with ourselves, the chair and vice chair, about setting a date for this extraordinary meeting as and when. So before we take that, I'll just take Councillor Driver's point.
Yeah, just on as and when, you were saying about the auditors are asking for at least another 4 weeks to look into things before they come back. So that will take us into sort of middle of February, end of February. And then by the time you organise a meeting where you're talking about 2 weeks, taken into March, we end up going into PERDA. Does that make any difference?
Well, I couldn't comment on PERDA. We've got a meeting on the 8th of March, but the agenda will be busy. We've got budget council...
that seemed to me that once you go into PERDA, you can't start making decisions.
Well, I'll defer to Leah for the PERDA point, or Jackie.
Just validate we've got time to do it.
That's the pre-election period. That's what PERDA means for viewers at home. Leah.
You still have an obligation to make decisions that you're obligated to do. Therefore, if we're in the position where the auditors are saying the accounts are ready, you need to sign them off, then we'd be obligated to do it on a timely basis.
And this committee doesn't work under any political persuasion. This is this is working for the benefit of the council. So I don't think we'll have a conflict. Annabelle.
Your point you raised, though, Councillor Driver, is absolutely right in relation to once the audit's concluded, actually we as officers need some time to refresh any approved and agreed adjustments that we need to do, and that's why we've been pushing EY to give us a timetable. As soon as I have that timetable, we'll do our assessment as to how long we believe we will need after that. And obviously I was giving consideration when we had the first conversation that we're producing audit papers, budget papers, it looks like we'll be past budget by the time they're ready to give us the final audit adjustment and opinion. So we will give that, but in time for us to put a timely meeting in and give you enough notice. We won't bounce you on a meeting, but we will try and do that meeting. I was trying to do it by the end of February. Now I've got this latest news, it will be more likely to be early March, but I'm definitely trying to do it before you get anywhere near the end of March.
When do you think they're going to start for next year?
Can you use your mic, Keith? Thank you.
When do you think they're going to start for next year's audit, and how many months will be in that year? What we're going to be able to do? It looks like it's going to be about 7, 8.
So I wasn't at the meeting where the question was asked, but I don't believe they answered the question, did they, Hannah? Sorry.
No, they just gave us a holding response about needing to review their resource and their plan for next year.
Not good enough, is it, for an audit committee to sit here and we're counting our fingers waiting for them who earn thousands of pounds out on us for doing the job and they're not doing it. I mean, we look silly.
Thank you for that observation, Councillor Triver. I'm going to let Councillor Stootley in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I understand we're going through a process of renewing the contracts. What are the chances through that process that we can actually change our auditors to a different company? Not necessarily a bigger one, because I don't think there are many bigger ones than that, but just a different one, just to start the relationship again and see if we can pick it up and improve, because I think that might be beneficial.
I'll let Annabelle in a second, but obviously this was one of the items we were discussing at the last committee, an item that we chose not to go into its fullest, but I believe the report doesn't allow us to choose who it is. It is a geographical allocation of one of the big four, but it's that consortium process that we endorsed for the reasons we did. But Annabelle may want to add to that.
No, you've covered it. Thank you, Chair.
And I would add, and I meant to add, and Jackie's reminded me, is that we will be discussing this at council, and I will be making those points, and I encourage whoever from the Labour group to make those points as well on that particular item.
May I just come back on that? Thank you. Yeah, the report that we had in the last committee that we discussed at the time that we were in a position where we were basically that we had no choice, and we essentially we're in a position now where it's got worse, and there is I'd like to see if there's a potential for moving away from Ernst & Young in particular, although I understand there's a pool of companies that are involved in that particular deal. So therefore, is there an opportunity to move away from this particular company who are letting us down?
Okay, well, the Cabinet member has indicated, so I'm going to let him in a moment. Annabelle may want to respond further. As a committee, we recommended to council to go into that consortium, and as far as I'm aware in the papers that you had, you don't have that choice of choosing a different one of the big four. I think it's geographical, but officers can stipulate that. So my answer is no, there is no choice, other than when this council considers it next week on Tuesday, that the council can vote against that endorsement and choose a different route to go independently and do it for an independent, or to approach one of the companies independently. But I'll let Councillor Kendrick in at this point, and then see if Annabelle wishes to add.
Thank you very much, Chair. I entirely agree with the feelings of this entire committee of our frustration in regards to our external auditors, but we are rather in between a rock and a hard place. I think the whole system is broken. I don't think that just moving to another company would suddenly magically improve the situation, nor do I actually think that if we were to go down next council meeting to a different route, there would be much of an improvement either, because at the end of the day, if we were to do it locally, that would obviously be more expensive. We'd have to set up our own independent panel, and I'm going to the complexities of it all here, but at the end of the day, you're choosing between, it's almost like to say, use the word cartel, of a very limited number of companies, and I think nearly all of them are beginning to buckle under the sort of pressure. At the end of the day, it comes to the fact that yes, these are very large companies, but they don't put in the resources into this particular sector of work, and they obviously find more profitable to actually audit rather large companies. Not always, in my opinion, in the best of ways, but that's my opinion. We, as I say, I entirely share the views of this committee. It is and I'm sure the officers must feel the same. Given all the very hard work that our officers have put into using the audits, put into the accounts, which was done on time, that we now have this tremendous delay imposed upon us by our external auditors, and it is much to be regretted, but I'm not sure there is an easy way out of this particular dilemma.
Thank you, and I appreciate the responses from the Cabinet member. Just to pick briefly up on your point there, you're absolutely right that the potential for the fact that the external auditors could be putting more resource into their private contracts is perhaps a reasonable one to put, but there again, the fees reflect the value of that work, and the local government fee structure is significantly less than the private sector work. But there does need to be better regulation. There does need to be a tightening where this committee has gone through a process. We performed the Redmond review, and we've looked at different areas. And this committee has systematically warned about the shortcomings in external audit marketplace, as well as the costs. So we have been ahead of this and aware of this for some time, and it is frustrating. I've seen that Councillor Stutley has indicated, so I'll take Councillor Stutley and then I'll see if there are any final points from officers. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Kendrick. I wasn't suggesting that either we spend more money or change the decision that we made at the last council. I was just seeking, in desperation, ways of changing the current setup that we've got, and I accept the answer is that no, we can't. But thank you anyway.
Thank you, and officers have nothing to add, and I appreciate the sentiments from Councillor Stutley, because there is no wrong questions or wrong answers, and we are trying to do our best by this council, so it's a fair question to ask. So if there are no other points or observations, Councillor Sands, please.
Just a simple one. If City Council, or indeed any council, didn't fulfil its obligations somewhere, there'd probably be some sort of penalty clause. Does the external auditors face some sort of penalty clause, i.e. paying back some of the fee we pay them if they don't meet their obligations in completing the audit in good time?
No, I think that was answered slightly earlier. No, there aren't any penalty fees. And again, I'll refer to our work around the Redmond review. We are acutely aware that there are failings in the external audit market at the moment. There have been attempts to rejig it, to restructure it, and I think the suggestion of penalty fees for late delivery of external auditors is a good one, and I'm sure if we embark upon any other reviews or consultations in the future, I'd welcome your input on that, Councillor Sands. Yes.
And we've achieved what we've done without any wine and cheese afternoons, I might add.
Couldn't possibly comment. So I think we bring that to an end. So I think the committee has consensus that Annabelle will speak with myself and Councillor Driver, and we will get a meeting scheduled at our earliest convenience to finish the accounts. And our thanks will go on record to officers for working under these conditions. Okay, so we bring that item to a close, and that is the end of the business of the agenda today.